1491, a 19-year-old girl stood in a courtroom surrounded by powerful male clergy. And one of the main accusations that was against her was not murder or treason. In fact, it was that she wore men's clothing. This is about Joan of Arc. In the survey I conducted, 100% of you guys said that you were not familiar with Joan of Arc at all. And many of you also said that you were neutral or somewhat agreed or were somewhat interested in gender roles. But over half of y'all strongly agreed that gender norms still influenced power today. And Joan of Arc's story kind of shows how those power structures were enforced centuries ago and how they still matter to this day. Although Joan of Arc is often remembered as a historic martyr, her trial demonstrates how medieval authorities criminalized gender nonconformity to silence a younger, lower-class woman who was threatened and who established power structures. In preparing for this speech, I examined translated transcripts from Joan's 1431 trial, as well as historical analyses from historians such as Helen Castor and Regine Pernaud, who specialized in medieval France and Joan's legal proceedings. I'll be talking about the gender expectations of medieval society, how Joan's clothing became central to her conviction, and how her trial reflects border systems of power and silencing. In 15th century France, women were expected to marry, manage households, and remain under male authority. And according to historian Helen Castor, medieval society viewed male leadership as divinely ordained, meaning gender hierarchy was considered part of God's design. And additionally, historian Regine Pernaud explains that women rarely held public authority and female leadership in military spaces was viewed as unnatural and dangerous. Joan cut her hair short, she wore armor, and she led the French troops during the Hundred Years' War. And these actions placed her in exclusively male places. And she also advised King Charles VII and played a pretty big role in his coronation, and she was giving a teenage peasant girl political influence in royal decision making, which was virtually unheard of at the time. And once we understand how rigid gender expectations were, it becomes very clear why her clothing became central to her trial. According to the translated 1431 trial transcripts published by the Fordham University Medieval Sourcebook, Joan was repeatedly questioned about whether she believed it was lawful for a woman to wear men's clothing. And judges cited biblical law, specifically Deuteronomy 22:5, to frame her clothing as sinful and heretical rather than practical. Historian Regine Pernaud argues that although the trial was politically motivated, the charge of cross-dressing becomes the legal justification for execution. And today, many urban areas still reflect divisions along racial lines and the remnants of past urban renewal efforts continue to disrupt previously cohesive neighborhoods. And according to the Charlotte Anti-Displacement Strategy, these systematic issues have a significant psychological impact on displaced individuals who often suffer from heightened anxiety, depression, and a deep sense of loss concerning their cultural identity and community connections. Joan's trial was not only about clothing, it reveals something much larger about how institutions silenced marginalized voices. She was a peasant girl and illiterate, and she was only 19 years old, and she was standing before the male clergy, backed by English political power. And according to historians Bonnie Wheeler and Charles Wood, her trial demonstrates how religious courts were used as political tools during the Hundred Years' War. Historian Helen Castor explains that Joan's detailed trial transcripts are rare because medieval records typically preserve elite male voices. And although she was executed and had a retrial in 1456, in 1920, and in 1920 she was canonized as a saint, showing her institutions later reshaped her image once she no longer posed as a threat. Joan of Arc's story is more than a legend of a warrior girl. Her trial reveals how medieval authorities criminalized gender nonconformity to suppress a younger, lower class woman who challenged political and religious power. If gender expectations could determine life or death in the 1400s, how do gender norms still influence who's believed, trusted, or given authority today? Joan once said during her trial, "I'm not afraid. I was born to do this." Though she was silenced at 19, her words still remain. The question is, whose voices are we still trying to silence to this day? Thank you.